在第二场专题讨论呢，我们要聚焦探讨的是域名滥用防治的作为以及挑战。Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our forum, and we will now proceed to the second panel discussion focusing on actions and challenges in preventing DNS abuse. 这个场次呢，我们邀请到相关的利害关系人，来透过解决域名滥用的案例以及样态，来了解域名滥用防治的现况，也包含了点 TW 域名在防治域名滥用的相关作为。In this session, we invite relevant stakeholders to share insights into the current state of DNS abuse prevention, including the .tw registry's ongoing effort to combat DNS abuse. 这个场次的主持人是台湾网络资讯中心的于若凡执行长。The moderator for the session is Ms. 若凡于, Managing Director and CEO of TWNIC. I will now give the floor to our moderator. 接下来就把时间交给主持人于若凡执行长。
谢谢大家。
Well, thank you once again for attending this session. Well, if you have been with us in the previous session, we talked extensively about scam and fraud. However, when we talk about domain name abuse, we mainly talk about malware as well as other abuse activities. But for users, they actually don't make a distinction between whether it has to do with content or with domain names. So, for users, they obviously don't have the expertise to make that kind of distinction. And that's why we have invited a panel of experts. And what's different from the previous session is that previously we talked about applications, mostly dealing with issues such as content. However, today, in this particular session, our panelists come from either registries or registrars. So the abuse of content obviously is different from what we will be discussing now. Immediately to my right is Ian Chang. At TWNIC, we have accumulated a lot of expertise when it comes to domain name abuse. So Ian Chang is from TWNIC. He will be sharing a lot of our experience with us. And to his right, we have Mr. Pan Junliang from the Institute for Information Industry. Again, he's someone who has been dealing with domain name abuse for a long, long time. So when it comes to new emerging technology, as well as intellectual property right, he is truly an expert. And Alban Kwong, I don't know his Chinese name. He's currently head of corporate development and strategic alliance of CSC. CSC is a US-based company dealing in the area of anti-phishing as well as platform protection. So on a daily basis, they have received a lot of notices in order to take down certain content. And in the case of Alban, as mentioned already, he's head of corporate development and strategic alliances here in Asia-Pacific region. As mentioned already, he has very extensive experience in this regard. He has been with CSC for more than 15 years because he joined CSC back in 2009. In terms of brand services, as well as services to their customers, again, he is someone you want to consult in the area of protecting digital assets, protection of brand, cybersecurity, and so on and so forth. Especially his focus on the Asia-Pacific region. So as you can see, Alban is a panelist in a lot of different sessions at our forum this year. So he's someone who has been promoting relevant policies in a very big way. And we also have Abby Wang with us. Again, it is with great delight I would like to introduce her to you. She is General Manager of WebNIC. WebNIC is registrar based in Malaysia focusing on brand protection. They have been assisting companies to engage in digital transformation. She has 19 years of experience in the area of legal compliance. Therefore, she obviously is an expert when it comes to global domain name abuse and digital asset protection. So the digital transformation of brand, as well as the construction of brand-related website, how we can make sure our customers will be compliant to laws and regulations. And so we have panelists from both home and abroad. We will begin with our representative from Taiwan. So let's go to Ian first. Please show my slide. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. On behalf of TWNIC, I would like to provide you with a brief overview of the current situation when it comes to domain name abuse and what can we do in order to prevent further abuse from happening. So, as you can see from this slide, we have been in the business of gathering relevant information on crimes committed on the internet. According to Cybersecurity magazine, back in 2024, the global economic loss caused by internet crimes reached $9.5 trillion. So if we compare this type of money to a country's economy, actually that kind of money is the third biggest economy in the world. This is really astronomical, and it is growing by 15% annually. So we just talk about economic loss. But what about illegitimate profit made by criminals? Again, that's really very astounding because the total number exceeded $1.5 trillion. Again, this is equivalent to the 16th largest economy in the world, overtaking the GDP of countries such as Indonesia, Turkey, and the Netherlands. Therefore, we are looking at very significant economic losses and illegal monetary gains. So that's a little bit of the message with regard to the global landscape. However, if we are to zero in on domain name abuse, we need to begin with possible patterns of domain name abuse. For example, malware, phishing, and email spam. And as compared with previous year, there was an increase of 54%. In other words, a total of 16 million attacks have been launched in 2024. And as a matter of fact, this kind of attacks concerned a total of 8.6 million domain names, an increase of 81% as compared with the previous year. So abuses concerning domain name is really a rising problem. In August of 2024, if we look at the percentage of different type of domain name abuses, for example, with regards to new GTLD, it accounted for 11% of the total abuses. However, CCTLD, we know that in terms of percentage, it's not the most prominent type of domain name abuse. So again, those are just some background information for your reference. And here at TWNIC, last year, I'm talking about 2024, we came up with some of our reports as well. And we have conducted some research. 61.24% of our people have received scam messages in the previous 3 months, and 3.5% of them actually became victims, exceeding 700,000 people in number. According to Spam House latest report, in recent years, we see a lot of scam activities masquerade themselves as someone providing postal service or courier services, and also so there are some keywords: service account, online login verification. These keywords often appeared in scam messages as well. And in 2021, right around then, if we look at TWRPZ case, again, we have done some analysis. And the majority of the cases have to do with financial and insurance industry. And this is followed by e-commerce, accounting for 16%, and 5.25% of the cases have actually target government agency and state-owned businesses. So if we compare our own number and the Spam House report, we can see some commonality between two different sets of data. So .tw actually is something we want to focus attention on, because compared with other GTOD and CCTOD, is actually cases involving .tw accounts for a smaller percentage, although we are seeing a rising trend. So again, this is statistics shared by NetBeacon Institute from 2023 January to December 2024. During a period of 2 years, we can see somewhere between 20,000 to 45,000 of domain name abuses have been reported. And among them, the cases involving .tw accounted for somewhere between 5 to 30 cases every month. But we are talking about cases which have been reported. In other words, there are probably some incidents which have not been discovered yet, or which have not been reported. Anyway, compared with other CCTOD, .tw is not a major problem right now. However, bad reputation scored is something produced by Spam House. Looking at the GTOD and CCTOD, for example, last year or last March, in terms of GTOD, number one is .town, and CCTOD number one is .sx, and .tw is ranked number 15. And in terms of the severity, if we look at all TLD, the total, the overall ranking for TW is somewhere either 107th or 108th, because we know that severity is lesser in the case of CCTOD. And over the past 3 years, we can see among all reported cases, TW accounted for only 1.07%. Therefore, this is just a chart for your reference. Again, 98% of the cases had nothing to do with .tw. So, in other words, in terms of the scale and scope of domain name abuse, TW is obviously not it's not a major issue, but we still need to pay attention even if there is only one case. Therefore, we want to strengthen the KYC mechanism. For example, in recent time, we are now implementing policies in relation to prevention of domain name abuse, and we are launching 2 services, Green Domain Name Certification Service and Safety Log Service. We also try to engage in collaboration with partners to deal with this problem in real time. For example, public-private partnership is a very good case in point. In addition, DNSRPZ and also joint prevention mechanism against phishing and the setting up of mechanism of trustworthy notification procedure. We want to be very proactive in order to prevent dubious domain name abuses from happening. So in terms of perfecting our policy, here we referred to ICANN and the experience of various countries because we want to put in place our own policy against domain name abuse. Obviously, in our agreement, in our contracts, in our procedures, we want to continue to make improvement. That's why we propose to formulate dedicated laws. And in terms of green domain name certification service, well, this is a voluntary system. So basically, upon review of the information presented by the registrant, then we can decide whether or not to certify the web name, the domain name. On the right-hand side, you can see upon certification, there will be wordings as shown on the screen, denoting as such. And also, we have domain lock service. Again, we hope that this will provide better protection for registrants of domain names. In terms of our public policy partnership, the first item I would like to present to you is response policy zone. Again, we know that there is infrastructure required for accessing internet. We are talking about ISP. So we obviously have our framework, and we want to prevent bad face web name either in Taiwan or outside of Taiwan from being resolved by the ISP. So if the RPZ is activated, then you will see this message and the access to the domain name has been terminated. So this is what you will see on the landing page, and it will show what government agency has come up with a decision, what's the legal basis, and if the registrant wants to file a complaint, there is information about how you can do that, and if it has to do with .tw, then TWNIC will be the agency which decides to terminate a resolution of this kind. And in terms of collaboration against phishing, again, we work with relevant agencies. Again, we want to prevent real-time resolution of concerning website if they are suspected to engage in phishing activities. Again, we use the same framework like the one we saw with RPZ. In addition, in terms of building a trustworthy complaint filing mechanism, again, what we want to make sure is that we can put in place a good procedure, because we have worked with .Asia and CSC. Once we receive a notification, then based on our own agreement or our procedures, we will be able to take corresponding actions to prevent crime activities from being acted. So that concludes my very brief presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian, for introducing us to some of the services or functions of TWNIC. Let's move on to hear from Project Manager Junliang Pan to talk about the dispute resolution mechanism governing domain abuse. Can you show my slides? CEO Yu, distinguished peer panelists, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Pan Junliang from the III. We have been working with TWNIC, actually serve as a dispute resolution body of abuses involving .tw domains. So we have a lot of experience in this area. That's why today I would like to share with you some of the legal risks involved and what are some of the dispute resolution mechanisms and challenges facing domain abuse. Yes. So would you like to start by sharing some news, a news story with you? There's a British territory located in the Caribbean Sea called Anguilla, and the CCDOD of Anguilla happens to be .ai. And we know recently we've seen a AI boom or AI hype. So that's why this .ai domain name has become wildly popular, and it earns over $1 billion every year by leasing its CCTOD.ai. So as we see, there might be some controversies involved. We've seen more and more controversies regarding domain name registration. So I will cite some of the WIPO-mediated cases and some of the dispute resolution cases over the years. Now, this is the latest update on WIPO domain name dispute resolution. According to the latest report, last year, WIPO handled 601,068 domain name disputes, which marks the second highest on record. But as you can see from the bar chart, we see a slow increase or flattening of the trend. And in terms of UDRP, offers an effective solution for cases involving cyber squatting or domain-related activities such as shipping. Now, in terms of the case number, the UK, the US, and France actually top the chart in terms of where the cases come from. In terms of sectors, healthcare, retail top the chart, and fashion and finance also top the chart. So there's a variety of sectors that have been victims of domain name abuse and have been filing complaints. And the Carrefour or Meta or Michelin, Lego, and these companies have filed complaints for their domain name abuse. Now, let's take a look at the situation of top 10 CCTLDs by number of domain dispute cases. So .co tops the chart in terms of the number of domain abuse cases. The second one is .ai. It has seen a surge since 2022. That's the CCTLD of Anguilla. The third one is .cc, followed by .es, .cn. These are popular targets of domain abuse, and these countries have been very active in filing domain abuse complaints. So what are the factors behind the high volume of domain dispute cases? For such reasons that this is visually similar to .com. There might be differences in colors only, so they look very different, leading to consumer confusion. So people may register .meta, .google, .co, leading to cyber squatting. It will lead to internet traffic being directed to the wrong place and relevant controversies. And also, .co is actually open globally for registration. There's no nationality requirements. Virtually everyone can register for .co. It's not like in Brazil, you need to be a locally domiciled legal person or natural person. You need to have a tax registration in order to file for .brazil. And also, .co is usually the abbreviation for companies, so it is actually popular among companies. And also, this kind of domain name may be seen as a virtual asset. So it may be released at a high value and be registered by speculators. And some brands or businesses did not actually register their domain name in the first place, so it was registered by somebody else. And as I said, AI is actually a booming area. So whether it's Microsoft, OpenAI, or Google, have all one after another launched their AI-oriented services and products. So there will be a lot of confusion involved in AI-related domain names. As I said, people might register .ai domain name because there's no nationality or identity restrictions if you want to register the CCOD for Anguilla. Now, what are some of the different mechanisms to deal with CCOD disputes? So .co, .io, these countries would cite the UDRP mechanism in its resolution. Of course, you might have to go to local entities, independent entities, for filing the complaints. For .ai, it's managed by the government of Anguilla, but .br and .taiwan are different because the two countries have their own. We have our own TWDRP, and .br, they have their own sets of rules, which is different from UDRP. UDRP does not apply in Brazil. But actually, disputes are essentially resolved in pretty much similar ways across jurisdictions. How about the applicability of local regulations? The top three actually does not need to cite local laws. Basically, they follow the UDRP mechanism. And in Taiwan, we have to follow ROC laws. And if you do not go through court litigation, you can also resort to dispute resolution mechanism outside of the court to make things easier. Now, let's compare UDRP and TWDRP. Of course, the subject of jurisdiction is different. We are focusing only on .tw and .taiwan. UDRP is more encompassing, including many CCOD or .com, .net, .org. These can be handled under UDRP. But the main authority in charge are also different. In Taiwan, it's basically my institution at III and also Taipei Bar Association. For UDRP, more entities are involved. For example, WIPO handles the highest number of disputes. There's also other entities under UDRP, such as Asian Domain Name Dispute Center and also the U.S. National Arbitration Forum. All these are entities providing dispute resolution services under the UDRP. Of course, in Taiwan, the resolution proceed in Mandarin, and whereas it's English in the U.S. And basically, under UDRP, it uses the language of the Domain Registration Agreement. And we have our own policy and implementation guidelines, but UDRP follows ICANN policies. Despite those differences between the two, but when it comes to dispute resolution, we need to focus on the same aspects first. Whether it's a trademark or company name or domain name, you need to prove that they are unique and it does not lead to confusion. A second element is that the registrant does not have due reason to apply for these assets. And thirdly, registrants actually use or abuse those processes. If the three elements are fulfilled or factors are fulfilled, then the registration will be deemed null and shall be returned to the original holder or it will be canceled. Now, some actual cases involving .tw and .ai. The first one involving the Issei Miyake Design Office, and the office filed a dispute complaint over its domain name, isseimiyake.com.tw. It said that it has ownership over these domain names, such as or trademarks, such as Issei Miyake, and the registrant actually posted a lot of characters or stolen or product pictures on his or her websites. So the expert panel determined that it may lead to consumer confusion, believing that the domain was the official website. So the complainant also provided evidence, proving to the expert panel that indeed the registrant did profit from commercial gain. Therefore, the panel ruled the domain name to be canceled and transferred. The one on the right-hand side is an IBM case involving .ai, because it has invented the Watson, an AI system or product. So in this case, IBM filed a dispute complaint over Watson.ai. And the registrant did not really use the Watson.ai. He just want to register this famous or well-known website. But the WIPO determined that IBM did own this trademark, and it may lead to confusion. But the registrant did not have sound legal reason or due reason to use the trademark. For example, the registrant is not called Watson, so why in the world did he want to register Watson AI? So the WIPO ruled that the domain name to be transferred back to IBM. What are some of the legal risks involved? For example, there might be different regulations across jurisdictions. The applicability of law may also differ from place to places. So we can actually, we want to see something like an international cooperation framework to deal with this issue. Also, there might be some government intervention risks, maybe government screening of, for example, there's 31.tw, because that's a website that may generate national security concerns. So that domain was canceled on national security grounds. Of course, there might be some, you can actually have sunrise registration and work with local consultants to reduce your risks. And there might be controversy arising from trademark or names, and different countries might handle these disputes differently, involving varying levels of costs. For example, under the TWDRP mechanism, the cost has been drastically reduced and the speed is also faster. But also, some companies may actually resort to sunrise registration, and it's better for them to familiarize themselves with the local dispute handling mechanism. There may actually a conflict between data sovereignty and personal privacy. We have the GDPR restricting access to who is database. But now you can actually make a queries on who is database via registries to serve as a basis for your complaint. Basically, it's not that problematic. There might be a lack of regulation in certain jurisdictions, so we need to support local legislation to fill the gap. Last but not least, which I think is more challenging, is the gap between technology standards and enforcement capability, because they are always new and emerging typologies of abuse. So we need to establish internal risk monitoring mechanism and stay up to date on the latest regulations and policies. So in terms of the level of impact, we see the impact may be high for the top three, that we may undermine business reputation and profit. And in terms of controllability, we have to think about whether we can rely on contract in order to mitigate risk. As for the difficulty to pursue legal action, is determined by whether jurisdictions have a predefined and clear dispute resolution mechanism and the enforcement capability of different governments.
So finally, by way of conclusion, I would like to share the following points with you. First of all, obviously, in terms of internet technology and business model, they are continuously evolving. Therefore, this has given rise to new forms of domain name abuse. Therefore, the existing legal framework is probably not sufficient if we want to respond effectively to new forms of abuses. In addition, when it comes to cross-border domain name abuses, again, international cooperation is indispensable. By engaging in international or transnational cooperation, we can be more effectively in preventing abuses from happening so that we can beef up the stability of internet governance globally. As mentioned by Ian earlier, I think source prevention would be becoming increasingly more important going forward. For example, in the procedures of registration, how we can verify the identity of the registrants. I think that's a very important element of our risk management and risk control. And with regard to protection for brand, I think brand owners need to be more aware of the potential abuses. Therefore, they need to take action accordingly. Right now, a lot of law firms in other countries, they are in the position of providing package service. They can help manage your domain names. They will continue to monitor potential abuses. So brand should be incorporated into this type of management system as an important asset for a company. Thank you very much. Obviously, we just heard a presentation from a legal perspective. And I would like to know whether we can hear from Elben, so that we can have some international experience in our discussion as well. I don't know where to begin, you know. Well, let me begin by saying 2 days ago, we work with a local, we had a conversation with a local platform here in Taiwan. And we touched upon the topics that we are discussing today, which is domain name abuse. As mentioned already, although we call it domain name abuse, but it's very difficult to come up with a clear-cut definition. Before I begin my presentation, I hope that I will tie my presentation to the previous presentation. So I would like to share with you an anecdote, a story first. A long, long time ago, in the land far, far away, well, actually, I'm talking about the United States of America, because in the world of the internet, when internet was first beginning, there was an issue that needs some resolution. Well, because as more and more people started to use the internet, who should be put in charge of the internet? Art Magazine actually issued a white paper because he was a government official with the Clinton administration. Framework for Global E-commerce was the title of the white paper. And in this particular article, there were few salient points. These salient points of that article are actually quite relevant to our discussion here. They may, in the article, it was mentioned that we need to adopt a bottom-up approach in order to effectively govern the internet. Well, because government regulation is too slow. So it's difficult for government regulation to catch up with the speed of the evolution of the internet. So it's almost impossible to resort to legal regulation. Therefore, what was being advocated is some approach that's very flexible, and obviously later on, various governance models were designed. For example, multi-stakeholder model, and with the establishment of ICANN, multi-stakeholder model became more prominent. Obviously, if I'm not mistaken, the self-regulation of the industry was a very important principle. Obviously, they believe this is very important, so they went to different countries trying to lobby on behalf of this principle of self-regulation. However, in recent years, more and more countries are beginning to enact regulations. So this is somewhat a deviation from the original idea. So to a certain degree, what I'm sharing with you is that whether or not we can go back to the original principle about how to govern the internet. In other words, I'm talking about a bottom-up approach so that we can set up a governance framework for the internet that would prove to be very effective. And something that needs to be mentioned, and that is when I was listening to the previous speaker, I heard a key word, and that is self-regulation. Well, the way I understand the term, probably 自律. 自律 is how self-regulation is translated into Chinese. This is probably not the best term, because there seems to be a gap between 自律 and the original principle. And in the previous session, it was mentioned that Section 230 was part of a legal framework, because it affirms the principle that Good Samaritan principle. I just attempted to translate a Good Samaritan principle to Chinese. The reason why I don't believe 自律 is not the best translation or the most accurate or the most precise translation. Well, you know, because Good Samaritan principle resorts to the good part of human nature. It resorts to the conscience that we all have in order to decide or in order to tell the right from the wrong. Well, because the internet is actually very flexible, and it's very difficult for us to draw the line on the sand to tell the right from the wrong. So it's not that clear-cut. Therefore, obviously, we need to be very nimble in our approach. Therefore, in my understanding, that's a very important principle when it comes to internet governance. Obviously, there could be some unintended consequences, because for those of us who serve the role as an intermediary in the internet world, when we want to deal with abuse of domain names, of platform content, a few numbers will actually come to pass. As mentioned in the first day of our forum, we know that information will be delayed when they appear on our radar. Therefore, we really need to tap into all kinds of resources. For example, automation tool mentioned by Anita, and our representative from Meta, I forgot his name, probably Zhu Bokang, and he said that later on they realized that by utilizing AI automation tools, there could be a lot of false positives. So that's why they abandoned those tools at the end. Therefore, again, this speaks to the point. How can we have access to real-time information? I think that's a very big barrier. Another thing that I would like to spend more time on would be the issue of costs and legal liabilities. I'm talking about the fact that as an intermediary, what is our responsibility? Well, if we want to draw a line on the sand, instead of just resorting to our conscience, whether or not we can come up with more objective rules. So there's one possibility, although we failed to implement that kind of principle very effectively. I'm talking about the fact that we hope that the government can tell us where should we draw the line, and we probably should have some policies denoting where the line is. So this will give rise to costs and legal liabilities. Because this means that our costs will become higher and higher as we try to deal with domain name abuses. Especially if there's a line on the sand, then I will really be thinking about legal liabilities all the time. What are the things I should do? What are the things I should not engage in? Therefore, I believe we really need to go back to the original idea, and that is industry-driven, bottom-up approach. I think that particular model is probably something that warrants some revisiting. Well, we know that criminals could register a domain name, but there's a fee involved. But the cost will be passed on to the brand owner, because users, customers will search for their company brand online, and there is a cost involved. And given the huge number of searches, so the cost could be quite high. And right now, what they are doing is they pass on the cost to the takedown providers. For example, companies such as CSC. And what we need to do is because we have to handle a huge number of cases of this kind, but we still need to manage our cost. And it's impossible for us to resolve all the issues immediately. So what we do is bulk takedown. In other words, we do this almost batch by batch. So notice and takedown typically what we handled in a batch manner. This is how we tried to pass on some of the cost to internet intermediaries. We know there are a lot of internet intermediaries. For example, Web2 platforms. As a matter of fact, they are in no position to pass on the cost to other people. Therefore, there is no other way for them except to, absorb all the cost. That's why a lot of these companies, they hire a staff of more than 100 people, several hundred people, and obviously there is a price tag involved. So right now, the problem they need to address is the fact that by serving as an internet intermediary, there are only a limited number of ways how they can manage the cost. For example, they demand more evidence, and they want the government to tell them specifically what they can do, what they cannot do. A few years ago, some of these platforms demanded the government to formulate legislation instead of myself making the judgment call. I would rather the government tell me what I should do. So this is how they try to control their cost, manage their cost. And actually, then this means that the cost will eventually be borne by the brand owner. But then the brand owner began to complain. Therefore, this is where the government came out and said that, okay, we probably need to formulate and enact some legislations. So from the point of view of cost management, I think we can clearly see that how the domain name abuse handling mechanism have evolved. Well, no trustworthy notifier was advocated for by .Asia and CSC, and we hope that we can have more organizations joining the trusted notifiers network. So this is a way for us to proactively prevent scams and phishing activities from happening. I will not go into great details with regards to this type of trusted notifier network. But basically, we share data and we engage in proactive strategies in order to prevent illegal activities from happening. If indeed we are able to very efficiently address this type of problems, and we can resolve these problems by using this mechanism, trusted notifier, if that can be successfully implemented, then the cost could be transferred from brand owner to the illegal to the criminals. We know that for a lot of platforms, they hire a lot of people trying to make a judgment call. But the trusted notifier basically is all about transferring the cost back to the criminals. Instead of hiring such a big team, because when you hire your employees, you probably need to review whether or not the judgment call they did was a good one, because there's a lot of QC to be done. But through this type of trusted notifier mechanism, the cost actually will be borne by the notifier. And then the notifier will be able to pass on the cost to the criminals. We know that the brand owner has a lot at stake. And so if eventually the cost could be borne by the criminals, those cyber-squatters, then obviously this would be a better approach. And that's something that we are still considering. As mentioned, I will not be going into great detail because it was already explained on first day of our forum. It began with .Asia and CSC. We also work with TopDot. And we also signed MOU with relevant agencies here in Taiwan. And again, there are two very important principles, and that is to share data. Because if we want to effectively combat this type of phishing activities, it requires data to be shared. And secondly, we need to have a fast response mechanism. If we are able to do both, then I think we will be able to adopt a very effective bottom-up approach, especially from the industry perspective. If this type of effort can be led by the industry itself, I think that's probably a better approach. Therefore, eventually, we hope that we can go back to the original principle. So content moderator, internet abuses will be handled more effectively, in my opinion. So that's why we are advocating for trusted notifiers. Thank you.
Thank you, Alban, for giving us some cost analysis consideration. We want to find out a way to sustain this model and eventually actually make the criminals shoulder their due cost. Now let's give the mic to Ms. Wong from TWNIC. Hello, everyone. I'm Abby. Just like Alban, I would like to start with an anecdote or a story. So there are a lot of consumer behaviors. Actually, there are 3 stages of online consumer behavior. The first stage is my time. When I was growing up, there was just the advent of the internet. We used the internet to do some shopping, right? So in the early stage of the internet, there were a way of new hosting companies emerged. They serve to help people structure and create websites for us to go do some shopping. That's the start of online consumer behaviors. That was also the time when web domains was being widely used. That was the starting point of the domain name history. And after the 1990s, we segued into the second stage with the rise of platforms like marketplaces, platforms, Shopee, among many others. But you feel that, okay, we were still shopping online. It was just like my shopping behavior online was different. In the past, I need to go from website to the other to see if you can find things you want. But that things have changed in the second stage. And in the third stage, is there anything new? We focus on the quality of life. There's a Facebook Live. There is a real-time shopping experience being afforded by different platforms. So it's actually two-way communication on these live platforms. So the changes of consumer behaviors in the past 25 years actually all speak to one common principle. That is, if you want to move everything online, you need a digital identity. And domain name is the most basic of everything. So regardless of changes in technology, domain names will always be there. And in my sharing today, I can say a few words about my background. Pretty much like Session Chief Chen, we share the same background. I was trained in legal studies, and later I worked for private enterprises. Over the years, I spent a lot of time balancing my different roles, or balancing the interests between private enterprises and the government, or balance the interest between users and companies. Probably you feel that in terms of domain name abuse, there's not much we can do. But on a positive note, I do think there's a lot we can do. As Alban said, in terms of cost control, we can actually do way more than what we're doing right now. You don't need to be a top-level international brand to have the necessary budget to prevent or mitigate domain name abuse. There are a lot of alternatives to address this issue. Now, I just walk you through the development of consumer behavior change online. We used different kinds of ways to do shopping, to have community activity, and these are still ongoing. But fast forward to the present day, what do we use domain names for? Well, domains are still widely used at this moment, but mostly they are used for operational purposes or used as tools. What do I mean? What do we use domain names for? First, we use domains for name suggestions. For example, this is the largest registrars. They came up with this name studio. We have a lot of AI-oriented tools, so we can leverage the power of AI to help you think of domain names or brands that suits your need. For example, we can use AI to help you to generate your digital identity. Because in the cyberspace, sometimes we have to think about how to identify yourself, how to show to other people who you are. So you can actually find some name suggestions at this name studio, but there are other similar platforms or tools. My company also provides the same services. You can approach my director after this session. Second, we use domain names to generate content. Let me share this website. It's called dora.run/AI. I think many of you have heard of this platform. It's a tool for you to create your own website or to generate content. It's fully automated. You don't need to talk to anyone. Everything is AI empowered. Especially those born after 1990 actually really like this kind of tools. You don't need to create everything from scratch. You only need to know where to look for the right tools. And these tools are just provided to you through this web page. It's actually using the power of AI to generate content for you. And the third purpose of using domain name is actually for you to generate social media handles. Regardless of what social platform you use, you still need to have this online identity, right? So you have to use SEO functions of Google, for example, to actually better promote yourself, to increase your presence. So you can actually help generate personal portfolio or a profile landing page. For example, this linko.me can actually integrate all your social media handles. If you upgrade to a paid membership, you can have your own domain. So again, we still need domain no matter what. So it's a very good tool for influencers or KOIs. And last but not least, domain can be used to generate shortened brand URLs because everything's automated and people are getting lazy. So URLs are getting shorter and shorter. So for shorter URLs such as fb.me are actually quite user-friendly. And a lot of brands and enterprises use these shortened URLs for marketing purposes. So these are the different purposes of using domains or domain names. Of course, there are all two sides to the same coin. There are upside and upside. What are the disadvantages of using domain names? Domain names are often abused for malicious purposes. The first type, as our moderator mentioned, involve phishing, malicious attack, or price infringement, and malware distribution, spam, and so forth. I will also say a few words about typo squatting or brand jacking. There are also encrypted cryptojacking. I will share with you some of the actual cases we've handled. So the snapshots are actually landing pages of Amazon. The two really look identical, but you cannot really tell the difference with naked eye. But how can you actually tell the difference? Now you can tell the difference from the URL, or where you can see the URL. It's not Amazon for sure. The other one includes the mentioning of Amazon. So when we all want to fight against fraudulent activities, I think the definition and management of digital identity is a critical first step, after which we can continue to think about how we can really prevent fraud. Without a proper management of digital identity, we can really never prevent fraud, because domains are actually transnational in nature. It's decentralized in nature. So that's why digital identity is very important. This is also one of our recent cases involving a bank. The bank was hacked because they have this two websites looking identical, but one of them is a phishing page, which you can see on the slide. But through this identification mechanism, you will see this is not the right one. But most people do not know. They just click. They are being conned into clicking into this fraudulent website. So before every click, you really have to double check the URL or the domain name. And this is also one of our recent cases on WhatsApp. It's an accident across the strait in China. Actually, WhatsApp is banned in China, but a lot of fraudsters or con artists use fraudulent or fake WhatsApp web pages to conduct fraud, to scam people into believing that they are indeed using a WhatsApp app, so they started to answer some user-related questions and provide personal detail. And this is what I want to focus on today. I haven't experienced this before, but sometimes people really like free streaming services or free porn websites. So of course they are free of charge, so really, but have you ever thought about what's behind those free content? Oftentimes, these websites, actually, if you are using their websites, just behind the scenes, there is an algorithm trying to crawl or capture your personal information on your devices, or try to implant malware onto your devices as you browse the website. They hope that you can stay for as long as possible so that they can capture your personal information. That's why sometimes you wonder why my personal information is still breached, even if you do not reveal any website, your information online. That's because you spend so much time on these free pornography websites or free streaming websites. So probably your devices have been infected by malware. And also a few words about so-called cryptojacking, or the spread of malware. These are some of the common typologies that deserve our attention. There's no free lunch in the world. We need to really see what's behind those free content. And what are some of the impact of domain name abuse? Here's a up-to-date information from the U.S. Scamming Snapshot of 2024. You see that there are top 5 fraud typologies, and you see that online-related reasons take up the 2nd and the 5th place. So if we can manage our personal identity online well, we can go a long way in reducing instances of online fraud. And I can share with you our experiences in terms of how we can prevent domain name abuse. This is not a busy slide. I try to give you a easy-to-remember narrative. First, how can we go about preventing such abuse? First, you need to establish a digital identity. You should have decentralized digital identity across borders. For example, Abby is the name of my digital identity, so I register for Eddy.com. So I have some business in Taiwan, so I need to register Eddy.tw, Eddy.taipei, Eddy.taiwan. I have to be inclusive in my registration. I need to cover all. I have to consider which countries I need to go to for registration. I need to register the relevant CCTLD. And second, I need to think about what business I'm doing actually. Am I doing the shopping business or beauty or fashion? These are main considerations when I choose which domain names I need to register. I need to go beyond Abby.tw. Maybe I need to consider abbcosmetics.tw, which will go a long way in enhancing my personal identity. This will reduce brand confusion or reduce instances of phishing. And thirdly, we should focus on typos in the English language. For example, Adidas, this Adidas, right? But sometimes Adidas may be misspelled. They turn the A into O, trying to deliberately lead to confusion. Or IKEA, the I has been changed into L because I and L in lowercase are basically hard to tell the difference. So not only do we need to establish and manage your online identity, you also need to prevent misuse or abuse of our domain names. So based on the principle of integrity, a lot of financial and banking brands would pre-register confusing brand keywords across multiple DLDs.
So what will be the final step? Obviously, if there are names which could be damaging a company's brand, for example, some new GTLD, for example, .socks or .sex. I'm not talking from a position of I'm not talking from a position of bias, but basically, AB.sex is something that I need to register first. Otherwise, some other people could register this name, and this could lead to confusion of people thinking that what our companies are all about. So these are some preemptive measures that we need to adopt. So that's why I believe those are the 4 steps that we need to complete. And aggressive monitoring. Well, this is actually a very complicated idea, but I will try to simplify the concept. First of all, we need to ask ourselves, what is the current status with our brand online? For example, if I want to know my health condition, I need to do some physical checkup, and we need to do the same with our digital identity. In other words, there needs to be a health check on our digital identity. In other words, we need to collect information with regard to some of the keywords so that we can produce health check report for a brand, for a company. And this can be handled by technology tools. So obviously for members of the general public, they probably have no idea what they can do. But actually the first thing you can do is to subject your digital identity to a health checkup. And number 2, we talk about content crawling. In other words, again, by using technology tools, we can crawl database in order to identify keywords. Once we detect those keywords, then we can go to the next step. Whether or not there is any relationship between our brand name and the keywords, whether or not this has created some opening for criminals, they actually spread misinformation, disinformation by tapping into those confusing words. As mentioned by Alban, there could be notifiers, right? Once I know the result of my health checkup, I probably need to monitor some keywords continuously and in the long term. For example, AB cosmetics. And I place those 2 keywords in my real-time monitoring system. So through AI and technology tools, we will be able to do that kind of things. Anyone who tried to register AB cosmetics, I will be notified immediately. So this is what I mean by real-time monitoring. And finally, for example, things such as takedown. Yesterday, when Section Chief Mei Jing was making her presentation, I realized takedown is actually something that's very specialized. In other words, people need to know Meta, Facebook, YouTube. What is their SOP for taking down problematic content? So SOP really is something that's very specialized. Therefore, it takes a professional team to be able to handle that. And also, we need to pay attention to which associations we can work with and what do they typically pay attention to. Once we identify problematic content, the content needs to be taken down, and this requires, again, expertise. And obviously, on day one, I wasn't here. And because of my flight didn't get me here on time for day one. And for brand owners, obviously, you need to actually come up with your own. Instead of being reactive, you need to be more proactive. Thank you very much. Well, actually, I would like to open the floor. Whether you are on site or online, you are welcome to raise questions. However, before that, I would like to probably say a few words by raising my questions. Because right now, if we take a look around the market, if you want to register a domain name, well, you need to think about how you do your marketing. Probably the shorter the name, the better the result. And or probably there's not enough opportunity for you to make registration. So, again, if we want to build our own digital identity, what kind of strategy will be the best for us to adopt? And especially here in Taiwan, you know, a lot of users, they have no idea what is involved here. For example, when they see .com, when they see .tw, then they really have no idea whether this is called GTOD, whether this is called CCTOD. Therefore, obviously for different TOD, we need to resort to different strategies. But for the users, they have no idea. Therefore, there could be a lot of opportunities for criminals. For large brands such as Google and Apple, obviously these are known, these are household names. But here in Taiwan, we have a lot of small and medium-sized companies. They account for 95% of our business community. But, you know, not too many people know about their brands. Therefore, they run into more difficulties because they don't have strong brand image. Therefore, for consumers, they simply could not tell. For example, IBM is something that's very easy for people to recognize, but that's not the case with a lot of smaller brands. And also for a lot of small and medium-sized companies, again, the cost is a very important issue, right? Therefore, again, by taking all those into consideration, whether we look at the brand, users, I would like to know from you, do you have any recommendations? So we probably can begin with Alban and Abby. And Richard probably can also share some of your experience. Well, let me give a crack on this question. But well, you probably know that this is exactly the topic of my presentation in the afternoon. So this is probably the pitching you do on my behalf. What I can share now, which I probably will not be covering in my presentation because there was research that was carried out by the industry, and this research project look at the habits of how domain names are used in different countries. Well, a lot of times we overlook the fact that domain name is an identifier. Whether you are a big company or small company, how would you want your company to be identified? I think that's probably the first thing that we need to pay attention to. And also, I talk about the habits of using domain names. I often give an example because I'm based in Australia, and the UK and the US, they speak English. But if I'm an Australian and I want to set up a small company in Australia and I register a .com domain name, and this will definitely be picked up in the States, right? Because they both speak English. Therefore, in order to make a distinction, we not only need to register domain name that end with .com, but at the end, there needs to be a .au, right? But this way, I can identify my company as small and medium-sized companies based in Australia. So that's the kind of domain name that I should choose in order to represent my company. So it's different for different countries. And in the case of mainland China, we know that all the brands in China want to show they are a big company. So they always choose .com just to indicate that they are major companies. So instead of using .cn, they prefer .com. But because Chinese is spoken in China, so there's no confusion with regard to whether this is an Australian company or US company. And in the case of India, probably they are not very patriotic. They do not prefer .in or .com. They prefer things like .web. So that was those information was shared in the report that I just talked about. So I need to begin with which is my target market. If I target the Taiwanese market, then I don't need to advertise. I'm a multinational company. And also, it depends on the habit of the users of our website. If you can focus on those two principles, I think that's the first step of choosing the right kind of domain name. Well, we do have a few cases with regard to small and medium-sized companies. For this type of companies, they probably register domain names such as .tw or .com. However, if they want to register more ccTLD, they typically want to engage in SEO so that they can be more effectively managing their domain names. So, because they can create a landing page. And with this type of landing page, this can go a long way toward helping these companies do their marketing. So that's based on our experience. Again, we would like to open the floor to see whether there are any questions or whether our other panelists would like to respond. Well, as a matter of fact, we have already overrun our allotted time. I think we really don't want to eat into your lunch break, so we'll stop here. Once again, I would like to thank all our panelists, and our afternoon session will begin at 1:30 sharp. So again, you are welcome to attend our afternoon sessions.
语坛的讲者，请讲者一起，我们来拍一张合影。对，请站到中间的地方就可以了。All right, and now we invite the moderator and the speakers to take a group photo. 我们再次掌声，谢谢我们这个场次的主持人，还有我们的语坛讲者。